All right, so this is the flagship, or the, I guess, introductory Reel Film Chronicles podcast. If you want to check us out normally, you want to go to, reelfilmchronicles.com, where we post all our thoughts about mostly movies, such as they are, on movies, on our collection. We're both something of cinephiles. We like to collect. My name is Nathan, aka Cale Morrison, and I'm recording along with the real brains behind Reel Film Chronicles.
You are too kind, Nathan. But I'm Brian, and we are part of the Reel Film Chronicles.
Brian, also known as
Rybone.
The notorious Ryebone.
That's the same one, my friend. It's pretty intense. Yeah, so this is our first episode of the Reel Film Chronicles, and we are going to be discussing Wonder Woman 1984. Although, I guess, is the 19 kind of part of the title, or is it actually WW84?
Well, I think the actual full official title, I think if you go to the IMDb, which is, as we all know, where movies go to become official, is Wonder Woman 1984, and I think the WW84 was like the marketing slogan kind of thing. Although I guess in the movie itself, it did come up as the title, right?
I believe so. And honestly, that marketing absolutely nails like the look and style of the movie that got us all hyped to begin with for this film, right? So I feel like 84 is the de facto name for this film.
WW84.
Like the first one should just be WW1. Takes place in World War I. And then we have another world war in 84, I guess. Or maybe this is the 84th war that, it's plausible that it could be our 84th adventure.
I didn't even think about that. WW1 actually works in terms of like the movie content and the title.
Yeah, it's interesting either way, I guess. So going into Wonder Woman, how hyped were you for this film?
Well, I wouldn't say I was hyped per se. I mean, to put it in context, the DCEU, is that DCEU? The DC Extended Universe is what they call their movie.
That's right.
Movie. It's what they call their movie film. It's some bad Borat impersonation. But Wonder Woman was definitely, I think, one of the high points of the DCEU, aside from that ridiculous kind of tacked on third act CGI fight against the quote unquote real Ares.
Oh, yes.
Other than that, it was a really great movie. Like when she goes up on the battlefield for that first time, when they're in the trenches and the music's playing, and like I'm getting chills just talking about it right now. It's like it was just one of those moments, and being able to watch that in the movie theater with my daughter, specifically with both my kids, but specifically my daughter, because I mean, honestly, we've had a real drought of female-led superhero films, right? And that was really like the first big one. But it was really, really great. So going into Wonder Woman 84, WW84, I was looking forward to it because like they had the same director, Patty Jenkins, was back, right? Gadot.
I'm shrugging my shoulders. I'm really not sure how to pronounce that name, and I did Wikipedia it before, and I'm still not entirely sure.
But it was all essentially the same team back, produced by Zack Snyder and the whole crew. So I was looking forward to a solid to great superhero film, and maybe spoilers, but I was sorely disappointed.
I think it's pretty fair to assume that we will be discussing spoilers for the film. I'm not really interested. I think everyone has probably seen it just due to the streaming and availability of it. So I'm not too concerned about spoiling the film.
Maybe that's a mark to put on all our stuff. I think we're going to be talking in general when we discuss films.
Definitely.
We're going to be discussing. It's going to be spoiler filled, full of delicious spoilers.
Without a doubt. And I got to say, in terms of hype for the film, I definitely fell victim to the marketing campaign. And I think that's due in part into the Thor Ragnarok, how parallel they were in their marketing, and they had that 80s vibe that, I mean, we are children of the 80s. We're absolutely digging that stuff. And then we go out to see Ragnarok, and it's full of fantastic energy and beautiful visuals. We were expecting the same thing out of Wonder Woman 84, just based on the marketing campaign itself. So I I admit I went in with some high expectations for this, probably a little too much. The other part of it is that it is criminal that Wonder Woman took so long to come out, a female-led superhero film. Why did it take so long, right?
It's pretty crazy, but also I think you're discounting the cultural impact of Elektra.
Elektra, which I don't know if you watched that recently. I did watch that last year as part of that Marvel Assembled project I was trying to do. Right. That is an unfortunate film, but I did have a lot of fun with it.
I actually haven't seen it yet. I was meaning to, because I sat down, because my son, I watched was it 2003 Daredevil with Ben Affleck from back in the day, because he was like, we're going through the shelf of movies in my room, and he saw Daredevil, and we sat down and watched that, and I was like, oh, well, I'll finally take the chance to watch Elektra then, because it kind of like ties in, and then I never did.
Do you own Elektra on disc?
I do. It's on DVD.
That's good.
Yes.
So you do have an opportunity to watch it. There were a couple standout moments to that film, but ultimately, I think Elektra combined with the poorly received Catwoman, which is a film that I have not seen.
Yes, Catwoman.
You just remembered it existed, right?
Yeah, I've seen the clips and the memes online, right?
Yeah. And I think with those two films, basically studio execs are saying, female-led superhero films are not going to do well, so we just go at least a full decade without anything.
I mean, it's such a weird way to approach filmmaking, right? The problem with those movies was not that they were female-led. The problem was that they had terrible, terrible scripts, terrible stories, terrible character development. It was beyond the ability of even somebody like Halle Berry, Academy Award-winning Halle Berry, to elevate that kind of material. And I think that was the year she actually... Wasn't that the year she won the Razzie and the Oscar for,
you're right.
For best and worst acting?
You're completely right. And basically through no fault of her own. I'm sure...
No.
I mean, I'm judging the Catwoman film without seeing it, but I'll just go along with the crowd and say, yeah, it was probably a poor script, poor direction.
And even Jennifer Garner, she's a solid actress, but she wouldn't have the range of somebody like Halle Berry. I mean, as an honest evaluation, but she's a solid actress, and I think she probably did what she could with Elektra as well. But I mean, there's only so much an actor can do with a terrible or subpar script. And I realize I'm talking kind of out of my butt on these two particular circumstances, but I think as a general rule, I mean, there's only so much even the best actor can do with a subpar script, except for the obvious exception of Nicolas Cage, who is amazing no matter what.
He really defines his roles and just goes all in. If he's giving a bad performance, it's on purpose, and there's a certain charm to it, right?
Yeah, I think I'm really looking forward to his film coming out this year. I think, what is it called? The Unbearable Weight of Greatness or something?
Oh, I saw a trailer the other day for... some kind of horror amusement park thing where he has to spend the night in this park, and if he survives, he gets something at the end of it. Kind of a nice take on the haunted house situation there, but basically Nick Cage, I'm almost always there, especially his more recent stuff.
Willy's Wonderland is the movie you're talking about coming out?
That's the one,
Where he has to fight off an army of animatronics in a Chuck E. Cheese style kids restaurant.
I'm just shaking my head in disbelief and definitely smile because I'm looking forward to that.
Cage, at his full caginess, his recent stuff, like you look at Color Out of Space, but especially one of my personal favorites in recent years was Mandy. Mm-hmm. Just amazing work on Cage's end, where people, I think because he did so much direct-to-video stuff, and it seemed that, I think in the back end, what was going on, like, at least the public story, was that he got himself into a bunch of debt, and that he was just doing movies, essentially every movie that came his way to make money to pay back. I think he got in trouble with the IRS and that kind of thing. And so there was a period where he was literally just doing every script that came across his desk, or it seemed that way to the general movie-going audience. The people forgot that this guy is an amazing actor, right? He's acclaimed by his fellow actors, fellow people in the industry, and if you look at his body of work, I mean, the guy's amazing.
And I think that's sort of an interesting segue into saying direct-to-video. The stigma, I don't believe, is there as much because we have a new direct-to-video in the form of online streaming services, right? Initially, movies that Netflix were releasing I think I was part of that gang as well, saying how good can they be if they're not going to be coming out in theaters. But we're seeing a huge production value coming out of direct to video, I should say direct to streaming services. And now, and while the world is in this pandemic, that's all we have are movies that are coming direct to video, including Wonder Woman 84, which was slated to be released theatrically, but Warner Brothers decided to release it directly onto HBO Max and video on demand.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think the whole direct-to-video label, that was from like the old VHS and DVD days. But yeah, the obviously the movie distribution landscape has changed in recent years, even before the pandemic, when you had obviously Netflix and HBO and Hulu and all the others, and Apple TV, I guess. I guess Apple TV is still a thing.
They're buying up films like Tom Hanks's Greyhound.
Right.
Yeah, I think there was another one, Sofia Coppola's On the Rocks, might have been the title of that. But these are legit films that would normally see theatrical releases, but they're coming straight to streaming services. I did see, just circling back to Wonder Woman, maybe a theory that we're all disappointed with the film because we didn't get a chance to see it in theater. And does seeing a movie in the theater affect your enjoyment of these films, like these kind of spectacle films?
Well, I think obviously there's a different experience going to a theater and you have the giant screen and you're with a crowd of people. There's obviously a very different way to experience or way to engage with that film. But I think that the issues with the movie would have been apparent even with the kind of mask of that initial experience. I mean, although you could be wrong because... I could be wrong.
I'm most likely wrong.
No, you could be right because I think that's what I'm experiencing with the Rise of Skywalker, where I went to see it in the theater with my family, and that whole experience of sharing it with my family kind of initially blinded me to some of the quite obvious flaws in that film's narrative structure and character development, or I should say lack thereof. So you could be right that the theatrical experience does sometimes perhaps mask some of those initial warts and kind of flaws that come up only usually in later examination, but maybe it was more apparent because you had the time and it was a different kind of experience watching on the small screen than the large screen, right? But for whatever reason, it was not a great film overall. I mean, I don't know, you want to get into this right now? You want to touch briefly kind of on the plot and what this thing was about?
Yeah, do we have a good synopsis of the plot itself? Let me just load up Letterboxd here. And just for
the cheater.
I know, I'm sort of cheating here, but here's the absolute like one sentence plot line of Wonder Woman 1984. Wonder Woman comes into conflict with the Soviet Union during the Cold War in the 1980s and finds a formidable foe by the name of the Cheetah.
Wow, that has absolutely nothing to do with the movie other than that there was a character named Wonder Woman / Diana Prince, and there was a character named Cheetah, but the Soviet Union thing?
That one surprises me. I don't remember any Soviets or really any Cold War aspect to the plot of this film. Was this part of the 45 or so minutes that were supposedly cut down from the original 3-hour cut?
Well, I mean, the whole Cold War, that would have been, if it was like Wonder Woman WW64, then it would make sense to do like Cold War plot. But there was, I guess, near the end when they were doing all the wishes. So there's two villains in this, right? So there's Max Lord, the kind of scam artist, businessman / Trump stand-in. I mean, there was also some obvious references to Donald Trump with that character.
Definitely.
And then there was Kristen Wiig's Cheetah, who starts off as a mild-mannered historian working in the museum, and then becomes a terrible CGI half-cat lady later on. But so like the main conflict really comes from, there's a magical wishing stone that appears that somebody digs up somewhere, And then Max Lord gets his hand on it, and essentially, what happens is you can wish for whatever you want, but then you have to give up something in return. And so he wishes to become the stone, which is so vaguely worded. I'm surprised he didn't turn into an actual stone. Like, it's so, this is the kind of sloppy, this general sloppiness of how the movie was constructed. But essentially, as he's granting people more wishes, then as this new kind of stone, he takes on the stone's power, which is what he probably should have asked for. He starts to, first he breaks down bodily, and then he eventually starts to go the opposite way, and for some reason wishing grants him more power, the power of strong winds around him.
Yeah.
The whole thing is kind of super really vague. So but one of the main conflicts is, of course, Wonder Woman / Diana Prince. She wishes to have her boyfriend Steve Trevor back, and in the process the stone essentially starts sapping her powers, her physical abilities. And then she has to wrestle with whether or not to give up the love of her life, this man she met for a couple days 70 years ago, to get back her powers to do good, or whether to continue staying with this man who is essentially, oh man, the whole Steve Trevor subplot.
That's a whole other situation
so much
there. And I just want to jump in there with this Power Stone, and how I was really surprised that the film didn't give us any kind of background on this stone. I'm picturing a regular 80s film that wouldn't start off with Wonder Woman like Deanna as a young girl. It would start off with a crew of people unearthing the stone from some archaeological dig, maybe falling victim to its monkey paw-esque powers, and then finding its way into Deanna's life here. Instead, we have Kristen Wiig, and I can't remember her name right now in the movie, but it's her first day on the job. She basically has this stone show up in the mail. It just shows up, presents itself, and that's where the trouble starts. Deanna makes her wish kind of silently in her head, but it still grants her power. It still grants her wish, and by taking away her power. Instead, we sort of get hit over the head with the entire this theme where you can't always get what you want, right?
So you hit on a very good point talking about the opening of this film, because there are really two separate openings to this movie. One is Princess Diana as a young girl competing in that American Ninja Warrior course with a bunch of other Amazon ladies for some reason. And then what happens is they're going through this course, and she ends up taking a shortcut, and then her mom stops her from ringing the bell or whatever at the end to signify that she won. And she's like, you can't win by cheating. There are no shortcuts in life. And she starts spewing out all those kind of cliches, which I suppose is supposed to be, I guess, one of the main messages of the movie, but it gets muddled. But then, and that goes on for what, like 10?
It's 10 or 15 minutes long, yeah.
Then it goes to a separate opening at a mall in the 80s. So bringing in that 80s flavor, which is really not hit on a lot in this movie. There's a couple scenes that kind of bring it into the 80s, but really this movie could have been in any decade. There was nothing really essential about the 80s that the story needed to be told then. But they're in a mall in the 80s, and a bunch of really inept robbers go in, try to rob a store, and then Diana shows up, or Wonder Woman, sorry, she shows up, and she saves the day, and she stops us, and it's a very, very different tone from the rest of the movie. It's very almost Sam Raimi-esque in how light it is, and like she's saving the kid, she slides her across the floor, and she lands like in a teddy bear, and then she like winks at her, and really, really like lighthearted and fun. And that goes on for another 10 minutes or so.
At the very least, another 10 or 15 minutes. It feels like it's part of a different film, and I feel like it's almost superfluous to the rest of the events on the film. And it also feels like it's the same kind of introduction scene that we've gotten a couple times with Wonder Woman. And I believe in Justice League, it was the same kind of setup where she's going in, she's going to rescue the hostages, and we sort of get to see how quick she moves, just like a taste of her powers. But by this time, we're in a sequel. We've already seen Wonder Woman do her thing. We've seen her as a child now. There's certainly a better way to do it in this film.
So your opening scene would have been a million times better in just setting things up for the movie. But also, you're absolutely correct. doesn't fit in really with the rest of the movie at all, or the tone of the rest of the movie. That's the thing. This movie is narratively all over the place. It's tonally all over the place. Just an example, I mean, going back to that whole Steve Trevor thing, where she wishes Steve Trevor was back, obviously, which is really disappointing, because the whole idea of the first Wonder Woman movie was, one of those ideas was this idea of empowerment, of female empowerment, right? Mm-hmm. But then to have her main motivation in this movie be that she really wants this man back, that she can't move on in her life because of this man. First of all, like that's super problematic and just boring and just done to death. But second of all, when she wishes for him to come back, the way he comes back, the way that the movie brings him back, is to essentially put his consciousness into another man's body and essentially steal his life. So everybody else in the movie is seeing this random dude, but we as the audience are seeing Chris Pine / Steve Trevor, aka not Steve Rogers. But it's a really weird thing. Like, and then they have intercourse later on with this man's body, raising all sorts of ethical questions, which really begs the question, like, as the writer of this film. And one of the things that was different about this film was, like, the first film, Patty Jenkins was directing only. It was written by somebody else. I can't remember the name. But this film, she was actually one of the writers. And I think maybe this is going to show that her strength is maybe more as a director than as a writer. Why not just have Steve come back bodily? I mean, you have literally later on this wishing stone. It creates walls around entire countries. It creates entire nuclear weapons, but it's not going to, it transforms people physically into terrible half CGI cat people, but it can't bring this guy bodily back. It has to mind rape this other dude to bring him back.
There's definitely this sense of consistency in these fantasy films. I'm willing to believe in one rule or the other. If this wishing stone can bring people back to life at the expense of someone else's life, perfect. Yeah, I'm willing to accept that. But if it can also conjure nuclear weapons out of thin air, well, you've just broken a rule in your own film that makes the rest of it make no sense. Exactly what you said. This is probably the biggest issue with the film, is why they would choose to handle Captain Trevor's return like this instead of just bringing him out of thin air, when you establish that is entirely possible with other devices here.
Especially like in a post-Me Too era where everybody's super or hyper conscious now about that kind of representation in film. I mean, if we flipped it around and had a woman and having another woman's body and then having intercourse with a person, the consent issues maybe would be clearer, maybe because that's how it usually, maybe because sexual assault usually goes that way in real life. But it just seems so odd in like a post-Me Too era that would fly, that would pass by so many levels of review at the writing level, at the executive level, it boggles the mind how stuff like that gets through.
And there was very little in the film that was relevant to him inhabiting someone else's body. We get a little bit of comedy out of him seeing himself in the mirror. He can see the body he's inhabiting in his own mirror, and then almost for the audience's benefit, we see Chris Pine, right? Why not just go in? Someone must have watched that and said, this is a bit of a problem. And I think you nailed it on the head right there. Post-Me Too movement and awareness. This should be a problem that somebody points out, and maybe just cut 30 seconds out of the film, cut a few lines of dialogue, and I'm willing to accept that he literally just walked in off the street. He doesn't need to have his own apartment. That seemed very strange to me, that like he was there. And just walking off the street, Diana's there, meets him, perfect, done.
I had read somewhere online, this is not my idea, but I think if I'm not mistaken, the movie Terminator came out in 1984.
That's right.
So it would have been awesome to do essentially have a shot almost mirroring, how they come back in time and they're naked and they're all hunched over, have Steve Trevor show up like that and then pan up to he's in front of a movie theater and there's Terminator on the marquee side.
You know what? Something like that would be good. And I think that's something where the film didn't really give us a lot of 80s callbacks, right? It's set in the 80s, but it's not throwing a bunch of little Easter eggs at us, for better or worse.
There was a couple things. Yeah, like there was the mall, there was the workout scene where you see like the 80s style hair and workout clothes. There were the 80s style like computers, which for some reason played video at the end, which I'm pretty sure in the 80s that was not a thing. Just a bunch of stuff with this movie. I'm going to go through and not nitpicking, but just like I'm willing to suspend disbelief if you give me something else to hold on to, but there was nothing really to hold on to. So you had like at the Air and Space Museum, they stole a jet, which was, of course, fully fueled and maintained, even though it was part of a museum exhibit.
I did see that nitpick as well. And the question, all right, what's his first name again?
Steve Trevor.
Right?
Not Steve. Not Steve. Not Rogers. Trevor.
I think my dad asked me if Steve Rogers was in this movie. And I'm like, you know what? I'm pretty sure he is. Yeah. So I'll probably always refer to him as Captain Trevor. I don't even know if he's a captain.
Yeah, I don't know. He flew planes in World War I, which qualifies him to fly fighter jets from the 80s, obviously.
Yeah, that was one of the little nitpicks that, again, I'm willing to completely forgive because, you know what? In my mind, he can come back and he could be a modern person with all this knowledge. The Power Stone, or the Swishing Stone, sorry, it can do anything. So why not give him the updated skills to fly anything?
Right. So the flying thing was a nitpick. I could get over that, but then literally as they're flying away, like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, radar is a thing that exists now, so they can track us. Which, like, she knew about this beforehand, so it's kind of weird that she would mention it only once they started stealing this plane. And she's like, oh yeah, I remember this power I have that I was working out to make things invisible. Why don't I try it now? This power that I never mentioned before and will never mention ever again. Just as some ham-fisted excuse to get the invisible jet in there. It made no narrative sense. No sense at all.
Well, it's almost like a Deus Ex Machina to just all of a sudden unveil this power. I would have much rather had them unveil that power in the intro scene when she's a child and developing her skills and say, oh, well, here's a tree branch and you can make this thing invisible. It's like, oh, that's cool. So she's been working at it for thousands of years and is now relevant for the scenes that, oh, yes, thinking back to my childhood, bam, I'm going to make this big object invisible. Fantastic. But again, it just comes out of nowhere. And it's almost like a throwback, like we just need to fit in an invisible jet into this film.
Well, that's the whole problem of this movie. One of the main problems is that it just doesn't follow this same or this basic kind of writing principle of, kind of set up, payoff, right? Where you set something up earlier in the movie in order to pay it off later in the film, right? So if, like you said, already you're making this movie better, you could have gone, if they would have come to you, Ryan, and asked you for some notes on this movie, they could have made this at least 50% better than it was. But yeah, like having her try as a young kid or try earlier in the film, maybe as stopping those bank robbers, turn something invisible. And it's like, okay, that makes sense, where she's like, or try and fail. And then it's like, oh, when I really need it. And it's like one of those kind of use the force moments, right? Where it's like in the heat of the moment when I really need to do it, I can call on this power. That's right. And do it, right?
And somewhat inconsistent as well, because she's losing her powers throughout the film, which isn't immediately evident, but is fine. But she got her wish and then does something extraordinary that she's never been able to do before, turn a huge object invisible. So in the narrative, she's getting more powerful.
And it's weird because the way the other wishes are depicted, it's almost like immediate, where it's like, I wish, I get my thing, and then I have to give up whatever it is. But it happens immediately. But for her, it happens kind of slowly throughout the film. And it seems like it's almost like a wave where it's like she's losing her powers, but then she gets strong enough to like throw a whole truck or push a whole truck down the road. Speaking of that, you want to talk about that whole action sequence there, which was, again, problematic of not just the narrative aspect, which was like they were just driving through, I think they were in Egypt, and they just happened to drive by the very person they're looking for in that country.
It's way too convenient. I think the entire scene was maybe either involved in reshoots or just done at the very end of the schedule. It felt like an afterthought to insert another action sequence into the film.
Well, the whole thing is not just is it narratively sloppy, but like from a visual effects standpoint, it just a lot. There's a lot of terrible. There's some really good There's some good visuals in there actually, with where they obviously you could tell they were using some actual real vehicles and whatnot for some of those stunts. But some of that stuff where she was for some reason when she was running, it looked really really bad. When she was supposed to be running really fast, that always looked bad. And then those CGI kids that she rescues. Oh my, like it was just I can't believe that's in like a multi-million-dollar film and that's what was left in there.
And I'm always one to forgive some special effects. Like I can get caught up in the moment and the wonder of cinema. But this particular moment where
Absolutely.
she swings through, she picks up these two kids off the highway and proceeds to she lets go of the whip. She can't hold on to it anymore. But she's rolling down this highway, looked completely awful. I have no other words for it. They weren't even CGI kids in the one shot. They were basically life-size dummies that I felt as though they needed to do CGI correct afterwards to give them a little more life. Because I can't picture Gal Gadot rolling down this highway for real. I imagine it was a stunt double. And so they would take the time to CGI her face back onto it, but these kids were just dummies, and it looked very, very bad. It lingered on the shot for quite a long time. It doesn't cut away to make it a little more bearable.
Yeah, and it's just like scenes like that, or scenes like shots at the end where Cheetah takes on her final apex predator form, where for some reason Kristen Wiig's character got two wishes because she wished to be She wished to be more like Diana, which she didn't realize that she was Wonder Woman, even though she doesn't wear a mask or anything. But then she's like, so she was getting stronger and faster and all this stuff, and I guess at the cost of her moral core and her good-naturedness, which was established early in the film, because she's got a good sense of humor and a good personality. But then she also wishes later on when Max Lord is the Wishing Stone, and he teams up with her, and he's like, oh, do you want to have a wish? And she's like, I want to be an apex predator.
She definitely doubled up on her wishes, and that's completely unfair to everybody else.
Yeah, somebody should take that up with the Wishing Stone High Council, I guess.
Did she have to give up anything to become like Diana?
I think the whole thing where she was beating up that sexual predator who kept after her, where it showed that for some reason that was played as like a dark moment where this guy who kept trying to like sexually assault her, and she beats the living daylights out of him, and it was like dark music playing. But like this guy was twice now tried to like sexual harass her, and then the implication was he was going to sexually assault her, and she beats him up, and like I'm really struggling to see how she's on the moral wrong side of that.
It does play it in the completely wrong direction. It's almost like in that Me Too disservice right there again, where we should be cheering the defeat of the sexual predator. But instead, it's played up as her as a villain. As some random person sees her and just like, oh man, what did you just do? Well, I guess her monkey paw negative is actually turned evil.
Yeah, so it wasn't a random dude. It was it was a homeless person that she was helping out a lot, right? So that was the whole thing. Whereas if it was like, oh, like these two people were having a minor argument, and she stepped in and beat the living daylights out of him, that would kind of make sense. It's like, oh, she's turning evil because that was overkill. But like she punches and kicks this guy, and he's not dead. He's just severely hurt, even though she smashes him into a van hard enough to dent the steel.
Yeah, like he's if he doesn't have health insurance, he's in rough shape, like forever.
Which in the U.S. he probably doesn't. Yeah. So, but that's another horror story for another time. But anyway, at the end of the movie, when she goes full cheetah, she looks so bad, like a half rendered model that was left over from the Cats movie.
Yeah. Now, did you see Cats?
I've seen clips.
You've seen enough of it, right? I honestly haven't seen it either. And I have to wonder if part of this film, the cheetah moment, the transformation was already sort of done at the same time or even shortly afterwards, but enough that they couldn't do much about it. So they just made the scene so dark that, you know, it would try and hide things, but it's not.
A, it's like you got Cheetah, who looks terrible. B, it's dark out, so you can barely see what's going on. And C, Diana has her new golden armor, which, I mean, that would have popped in the daylight,
100%.
right? That would have looked amazing in the daylight, and they choose to unveil it in the middle of the night, in the middle of like when it's like it's cloudy and dark overhead. Like that whole ending fight was just such a disappointment too.
It wasn't very interesting. Now you sort of know what's happening. You see a pool of water, you see some power lines, and it's like this isn't a spectacle. Like even if you hate the original Wonder Woman's finale, at least there's some good imagery going on there, right?
It tied in narratively to the film,
Yeah.
and at least it kind of made sense. It was unnecessary, but they were trying to at least fit it into the film as a whole. This one just felt kind of nonsensical. I think if there's a couple things missing here. One was the reveal of the golden armor, which was just like, oh, Diana just had this golden armor sitting in her secret crime lab, her crime room where she was like tracking crime. It's like, oh yeah, I just have this. I was like, oh, okay then. And then she puts it on for the end for no reason. It would have made more sense if she was still losing her powers at the time, and she needed more protection. And then like, oh, I put the armor on, and then in the middle of that fight, that's when you do the recant your wish. It's like, okay, and now I realize like the armor alone is not enough. I need to do this to stop her, but it's not. It's just like, yeah, no, I'm just gonna wear this armor now for any reason. Nah, just because it looks cool.
That's 100% all it is. It's just to look cool, and we even get a little flashback story of the original warrior who had the armor, and basically a promise that later on in the film this thing is gonna really shine. She puts it on. She turns into an egg, basically gets hammered. Cheetah just tears it apart with zero issue. And I'm just thinking, why do we have this armor here? Was it just for a couple glory shots? And was it there just to make the trailer look a little cooler and get some promotional art? Am I seeing stuff that was originally like from the 80s where, like watching Transformers as an example, we get new Transformers every few episodes and in the movie just to create more toys. Is this a throwback? Is Wonder Woman 84 a throwback to create armor, to create more toys for people to go out and purchase?
Whoa, it's meta, dude.
Exactly.
It's like we're making fun of consumer culture by engaging in it directly and wholeheartedly. But yeah, there was another opportunity for like one of those use the force moments, right? Where she was like in trouble. She tried using the armor. It obviously wasn't working. And then she's like, as a last resort, I was like, I got to give up Steve to get my powers back. There's no way I can win the day with this. And like you said too, have a scene, right? Maybe a flashback where she's actually searching the world for this armor, and she finds the tomb of that. Obviously not the tomb, because it turns out in the after credits, post credits scene, she's still alive. Or working into the plot maybe, where there's like, we need this armor to help us, so we need to go and get
Here's
this.
what you do. We're going to go back. We're continuing to rewrite that introduction scene where she's a child. she's a child in Themyscira, and the warrior with all the armor is there teaching her how to do things like make objects invisible. And as a little girl, she looks up to this beautiful warrior princess in this golden armor, and maybe have a few words about it. So it works double time.
Yeah, even having that emotional tie. So like, this was like the armor of my master, right? It's like, again, pulling it back to like that Star Wars idea. I know like I'm referencing Star Wars a lot. That's
unbelievable.
Part of who I am. But it's like, yeah, like that whole thing in Star Wars. Like here's like in The Force Awakens, where she's like, this is this special lightsaber that was handed down from generation to generation. It's like, make that emotional connection to it. Or Luke, maybe better examples, like Luke getting his father's lightsaber in the first movie, right? So it's like there's an emotional connection to that, even if it's not, because obviously it's not great armor, because even though it was shown holding off entire armies, Cheetah just tears it apart in a couple minutes.
It's criminal. It's honestly criminal, because can she put that armor back together? I'm worried about that armor. And here's the other part where, again, my willingness to suspend disbelief is stretched a bit, and maybe it's just because I'm in a nitpicking mode of tearing apart this film. But in the first movie, we see her leave her land. She's got her sword. She's got a couple things. She doesn't have a big crate full of armor. But it's also established in that first film she can't go back, right? Or am I just thinking of some cartoons and comics that I might have come across? So now you're narratively telling me that she was able to go back to the basically to see her mom, pick up more armor and stuff, or was it hidden somewhere in the on the earth, and she was able to go and just dig it up?
And that's the problem. It's never addressed in any capacity. And then, oh, I just have this sitting around. Oh, why haven't you used it before? And it's like, because I need a dramatic moment to reveal it.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just that whole ending fell completely flat. And we haven't even talked about the second villain yet.
Maxwell
Lord.
Yep.
Who...
Oh, did you have to look it up on Google?
I have my little letterboxed thing.
You're failing your movie fandom here. You have to turn your card soon. Do you even watch movies, bro?
I don't even watch movies. I don't remember the names of characters after I watch them.
I'm teasing, of course. I have to sacrifice like learning my kids' birthdays and other important stuff. It's all, my mind is just filled with random movie trivia like this.
Oh man. But so Maxwell Lord is played pretty well, and I want to say everyone does a decent job here, right?
By the Mandalorian.
Was it Pedro Pascal?
Yes. Oh, you're getting your fan credit back.
Fan credit is back, and I might lose a little bit of that because I'm probably mispronouncing his name. That's just a given.
Yep, probably.
But he does an excellent job, and I like that he hams it up throughout the film. He obviously has his catchphrase, and it's kind of built into his character, but I really enjoyed his performance. Just seemed a little more involved than the other two leading women of the film. Although I must say, they really didn't have much to work with. His character seemed to be the most dynamic.
Yeah, honestly, I'm gonna go on record here saying like the actors in this film, they were not part of the problem. No. You had a ton of talent here. I mean, you had Pedro Pascal, Gadot, Kristen Wiig, and who else was in there? Steve, not Rogers, Chris Pine. Yeah, like these are all really talented actors. So like the problem with this movie I have is not in front of the camera. I mean, aside from the special effects, but like the actors in this were all top notch, A-level actors at the top of their game right now. Right off the bat, not right off the bat because we're 45 minutes into this thing, but the acting the actors I had no problem with. That part of the talent and that part of the equation was on point.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah. Did you want to talk about the finale? Maxwell Lord just giving out wishes to everyone on the planet.
Which again, the nonsensical thing about like the satellites and particles technically touching things. And like
that was a stretch.
Oh,
that was a very
God.
big stretch. Yeah, it was too coincidental. You know, he's in the president's office. He's in the Oval Office. And it just so happens that this technology is standing right behind him during this whole time.
But by that same logic, like air is made of particles. So technically you're touching everybody in the world right now by that logic that you're using in the film.
Yeah. It was almost a way to put the entire world at risk without much thought.
And then the whole thing completely falls apart as soon as you start to think about it. And this is the kind of rise of Skywalker syndrome, I call it. But the more you think about it, the less it works. Like, most of the world doesn't speak English, so they would have seen this person on their screen and been like, what's going on? Like, ¿qué pasa? Yeah. ¿Pourquoi qu'est-ce qu'il dit? Right? All this stuff. It's like, and B is like, everybody has to have TVs to be able to see this, and then see the whole ridiculous particle thing. But then he starts to, I guess, take health from them, because the whole thing is like it's taking a physical toll granting all these wishes, and so he wants to like grant people wishes. In exchange, he's like taking their health or something.
I kind of got the impression that he was stealing a bit of their soul, but I agree it was not it was ambiguous to say the least.
And then like the whirlwind there's a strong wind blowing around him. Where
that's all their souls coming in hard, I
guess. But he stands in this weird blue beam for some reason, and then she comes in and she's trying to get her lasso of truth around him, and the wind's blowing so hard her lasso can't touch him, until it turns out that it just does.
Yeah. I mean, basically, the whip just knows, or the lasso knows, that we've had enough suspense with this moment. It's time to get stuff done.
It's very good sense of dramatic timing that whip has.
And then she resolves it by exposing more powers that, well, I guess not more powers. We sort of determine a bit more lasso power earlier in the film where
That's another thing too, is like when she finally gets that lasso around him in the finale, is she talking through him, or does she like take over the cameras and people can see her directly?
I got the
understand what's
impression
going on.
that she was talking through him into the minds of everybody. They don't even need to be
Into their
looking.
mind, so telepathy.
100%. I am convinced that you didn't even need to be looking at a TV. The particles from the satellites could touch everything. So it just goes directly into your brain. And she's able to convince them. And this one makes a little more sense.
5G networks.
Yeah, this one I'm able to justify to myself because she knows all the languages of the world, right? She can speak in all their own native languages, more so than Maxwell did.
But can she speak simultaneously in all those languages in different people's minds?
Well, that's the thing. Like, we established that she is a god in the DCEU. At the end of the first film, her powers could just keep going.
So she is a literal Deus Ex Machina.
100%, yeah. I mean, basically, that entire ending was just, all right, we got to wrap this up.
But then her resolution to how she solves this problem, everybody's like making wishes, is she spouts a bunch of cliches about the truth mattering more than anything, and she gets everybody to recant their wishes. But that ending, first of all, it's like it's nonsensical, maybe, but the ending only works if you assume that everybody is a greedy jerk who wished only for themselves. Yeah. But what about the kids who wish to be cancer free? No. What about the people who wish to be out of an abusive relationship? All those people have to recant their wishes too for this thing to work.
100%. There's no positivity there. You can't have those good things.
There's no shortcut. So it's like, yep, you got cancer again, Timmy. Sorry, because Wonder Woman decided.
Well, to play the devil here, the wishing stone will grant your wish. It'll cure cancer. It'll make everyone's lives better. But at what cost, right?
Well, sometimes it's just physical possessions. Right? Because the one guy he goes to, it's like, I want all your oil, right? I'll build this wall and give me your oil. So it's like, I'll give you my house to cure cancer. That's a pretty fair trade. I think most people will be willing to do. It's like, yeah, I'll trade all my money for this guy not to beat me up on a daily basis. It's like, yeah, that's a fair trade.
It's a pretty grim ending when you start looking at it. And at that point, you're 2 hours and 15 minutes into that film. You're basically ready for this thing to wrap up. You're done with how ridiculous a lot of this stuff is. Do you think it ran too long? Like, do you think a shorter runtime would have helped this film?
I think it ran about 2.5 hours too long.
No, I agree. I think you nailed it. There's a lot of narrative issues. There's thematic issues that are at the core of the issues for this film. And no amount of special effects or redoing things here and there, making it a little more aware, is going to help resolve those core issues.
Absolutely. Lack of focus is one thing. I think this thing was obviously too bloated, as we discussed, with the multiple openings. And then I think there was one villain too many, either focus on Maxwell Lord or focus on Cheetah. But yeah, just a lot of stuff that could have been cut doesn't make sense. Like, the whole thing is like, can Wonder Woman just now fly? Because it was ambiguous. So she was like, first of all, she needed the whip to get her going, but then all of a sudden she was just flying. But then at the end, she wasn't flying. She was using her whip to swing around. You have the power. It's established now you have the power of flight. Why are you just like swinging around like Spider-Man? Why not just fly up above her?
Because it's absolutely fun to swing around like Spider-Man.
Which, speaking about that flying scene where she finally learns how to fly by just, I guess, falling.
See, I can understand that scene because she has renounced her wish. It's fresh in her mind. She's surging with power, and I think she's so emotional that at that point you really, like, she taps into her inner self and discovers, all right, I can, like, we're doing this.
Right. So that scene seems like it was pulled out of a much better movie and slapped in here. It seems like it was pulled from an earlier draft, because that's like one of those use the force moments where it's like she needs to learn how to fly in order to do something. But like when it starts playing that music from Sunshine, Adagio in D minor, I think it's called. But like that was kind of jarring because like that's well-known, recognized music. It's used a lot in a lot of movie trailers and video game trailers. And I love that piece of music. I love Sunshine. I know a lot of people say it falls apart in the second half. I love that movie entirely. I love that song, and I loved hearing it there, kind of, because it felt like it was pulled from another movie unnecessarily, where somebody could have. It felt like they ran out of money, and just like, oh, like the composers are all gone home now. Go to the library and slap this song in here. But like that scene, it felt like there was a couple different versions of the script that kind of got almost like mashed together, and almost felt like, because I think there was two credited writers. There was Patty Jenkins, and there was somebody else whose name I can't remember, and I apologize. Are you looking this up for me there?
I'm looking it up.
Rybon?
So we have 3 writers credited here: Patty Jenkins, Dave Callahan, and Jeff Johns.
Right. So it feels like somebody needed to go in and kind of smooth over all their contributions, so it felt cleaner and like it was coming from one distinct voice. Because it felt like almost like 2 or 3 like scenes felt like they were from different movies or from a different version of this movie that could have been.
Yeah.
And so it felt like it was almost kind of mishmashed together, different themes, that whole idea of like the truth will set you free, or the truth is the most important thing, which kind of doesn't come into play except at the very beginning, and then at the very end where she's spouting off cliches about truth being more important than curing cancer and all this stuff.
Yeah, it was pretty grim, but that lightning scene, I agree. That's a good point you bring up. It feels like it's from a different film. It's like that was almost too cool of a scene to drop from an earlier script, and maybe that earlier script was a bit stronger, and they just tooled around with it too much.
Well, I think maybe part of the problem, and I think it's becoming a bit more systemic in big blockbuster filmmaking, but this is what I call like the J.J. Abrams paradox. Because J.J. Abrams, if you look at his movies, this guy comes mostly from a producing background, right? So he's a producer. And so when he directs movies, I'm thinking mostly of, mostly The Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker, most kind of recent people's minds. But I think he directs like a producer would direct. So meaning that he will look at what's going to sell the movie, right? What's going to look good in a trailer, what's going to put butts in seats, and then working backwards from that. So it's like, there's a cool, like this is going to be a really cool scene where the Millennium Falcon flips around upside down and flies across the not Tatooine desert, and then working backwards to figure out how can I fit this into the movie. It's like, I want to have Luke Skywalker's lightsaber, and this is going to be a really cool scene. Then it's going to look really cool in the trailer, and then working backwards to say, how can I fit this into the movie? And I think that becomes apparent in a lot of big budget movies now, where you look at that lightning scene where Diana's like swinging across doing the Spider-Man lightning. It's like, that looks really, really cool. It's a really great visual. It's going to look really great in the trailer. And then working backwards, like, how can we put that in the script? And you can see that the script and then the story and the characters suffer for that, because you're working at cross purposes. You're working backwards to the way you should be working, right?
That is definitely an interesting take on it. I think you're right about it too. It's those fan service moments as well. You want to include that, put it all the marketing, because this is a business. And I think the marketing, circling back to that marketing campaign for this movie, was spot on. Whoever they hired to do that, fantastic job. It would have put everyone into the theater on day one of release. That opening weekend would have been gigantic. This movie would have done insanely well. And then a week or two afterwards, we would have seen major drops as everyone discovers that this isn't very good, really. Just not to sugarcoat it anymore. It's not worth going out to see again and again, like maybe the first Wonder Woman film was.
Yeah, the first Wonder Woman film, I want to be clear, like that was a really great film. It was one of the better superhero films, like overall, and especially in recent years. Like, it was a really good film. So I'm not bashing on the character Wonder Woman or female-led action movies or superhero movies or female directors. I think Patty Jenkins, her record of directing speaks for itself. She's very talented. I will say, based on this though, that maybe just like J.J. Abrams should stick to producing instead of directing, maybe Patty Jenkins' strength is directing and not writing.
That's very possible, right? I think it might be fair also to see how this film ranks up against other superhero films. One of the first criticisms I saw going into this film was that it's bad, because all superhero movies are bad. And since it's been basically a solid year since all of us have been out to the theater to experience superhero films, we've kind of forgotten that. I don't think that's a very fair assessment of the situation here. But the fact is, how does this compare to other superhero movies? Is it as bad as other ones in the DCEU? Is it as bad as some of the worst MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe entries? I guess the big question at hand here, especially for the DCEU, how does this compare to Suicide Squad?
Okay, so full disclosure, like Suicide Squad is basically, I consider that to be, it's an abysmal abomination of crap that was just thrown onto the film. I wouldn't call it a movie even, because the first half of that movie is just a random music video style montage that kind of sort of introduces all the main characters. Suicide Squad is steaming dumpster fire. It's hot garbage. It's a diaper full of rancid diarrhea. So Wonder Woman 1984, WW84 is not as bad as Suicide Squad, but it's pretty awful. I would rank it down there with, like, for me, some of the worst superhero movies. From the MCU side, like Thor 2, Thor the Dark World, I would rank it down there with that. Yeah, I see you're shaking your head.
I just watched Thor the Dark World and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thoroughly.
You thoroughly enjoyed it.
I'm sorry.
I'm just going by, and that's absolutely fine. You can like whatever you like. For me, Thor the Dark World was kind of same kind of issues where it kind of falls apart narratively. It doesn't have a lot of focus. Things don't really make sense enough for me to suspend my disbelief. Definitely. Which usually I'm at the far end, whereas like I will suspend the heck out of my disbelief. Like I usually won't pick up on all this stuff because I'm in a movie to get lost. Like I will forgive stuff. Like if you, for example, Christopher Nolan is one of my favorite filmmakers right now. And you can see videos online picking apart the logic of his movies. Absolutely. If you start looking really deep, you can pick apart his movies on a logical level and they'll fall apart. But he gives enough substance. He gives enough.
He has this perfect mix of substance and spectacle.
Yeah, and that's enough for me to suspend my disbelief. I'm willing to forgive all of that other stuff because you've given me something substantial to sink my teeth into, to ground me essentially. And that's what this is. It's not. Like, I hate nitpicking superhero films because they're supposed to be these fantastical, grand stories of people with magic powers doing magic things. But at some point, in order to ground it as a story, you have to have some of those core storytelling elements, core narrative elements, core character elements. You have to ground the world in some sort of kind of quotidian detail. So it has to feel like it's real. Like one of the reasons I think the original Star Wars trilogy works, again, back to Star Wars, you have like laser guns and spaceships and guys moving things with their mind and all this stuff. But it's like the universe, because it feels lived in, because the character dilemmas are real, because those interactions feel genuine, because there's a real conflict, you're willing to forgive, or not even just forgive, but embrace the more fantastical elements, right? And you don't necessarily, you're not invited to nitpick them. Where something like Wonder Woman, where it falls apart on a narrative level, even at a surface level, it's inviting you to nitpick all this stuff, right? It's not giving you that, it's not grounding it enough to suspend your disbelief, and that's the problem.
I think you perfectly summed it up right there. That's beautiful. It invites you to nitpick it, because I'm on the same boat. I hate nitpicking. I don't want to tear these little things apart. I get a lot of enjoyment out of watching quote unquote bad films, B movies, C, D. You bring it all the way down the alphabet there. I'm going to enjoy something out of those movies.
I've seen your letterbox list. Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
So I guess with that kind of brings us to what is your rating of this? After a couple weeks of seeing it, after talking about it a little bit, rolling around in your head, what was your
what's the scale? What's the scale?
We're gonna go by our letterbox ratings here as half star to 5 stars. Now, what was your initial rating? Because personally, for me, I would rate a movie moments after I see it, or even halfway during it. I'm gonna give this movie a star rating. And then maybe a week later, I'm thinking, okay, this is a more appropriate star rating. And I'll just go first. The moment I finished watching this movie, I logged it and I gave it 3.5 stars. And I went to bed. It was pretty late at night. I went to bed, got up in the morning, and said, why would I ever give that film that many star ratings? So I brought it down to 3 initially, but I am willing to drop it even further. I'm thinking 2 or 2.5.
Okay, so I just looked it up because I was trying to remember what I gave it. So after you just asked me the question, my initial thought was I gave it 1 out of 5 stars, but it looks like here I gave it 1.5 out of 5. So I was a bit more generous at the time, but I might have to drop that down. No, because I'll keep it at 1.5 because part of the thing I look at when I evaluate a film, and like I'll drop things down. I have like half-star ratings on Letterboxd. I wish there was like a 0-star rating, but it won't let me go that low. But like 1.5, just for the quality. There's a base level of quality there in terms of the actors, in terms of, like there's obviously the musical elements, the like some of the visual stuff and some of the stunts. It looked really good, right? Some of the stuff looked really good. There was only sometimes obviously when it got wonky, I guess when they were running out of money. But like there's a certain base quality that these films can't drop below. So I think that's why I gave it 1.5 and not like a half. Because if this were just like some indie film with no name actors and no special effects, it would have been, that's the only thing kind of buoying it up, right? Is like just by virtue of the genre that it's in and the resources behind it. But like, how much did this movie cost? Was it like
it was probably $200 million easily. And plus double that on advertising. Like this movie,
it makes you wonder where that money went in a movie like this, as opposed to something like the Avengers Endgame, which, I mean, obviously, even if you're not into Avengers, I mean, you can tell the difference in quality there. Mm-hmm. But like, you can tell where that budget went, even if sometimes you can tell, if you're nitpicking, you can find like little wonky stuff. But overall, you can see where like a $200 million budget goes on an Avengers film. In this film, I did not see where that $200 million went.
Yeah, like you're talking star power. There's really, I mean, there's quite a few faces we recognize, but there's 4 stars here. And they're probably not pulling in huge dollars, right?
They're not pulling in Tony Stark.
They're not pulling in, exactly, yeah. And that's the issue here. It feels like it has a relatively small cast, but it has an absolutely gigantic budget. And for that budget, we expect pretty much through and through perfect special effects, CGI, and there's a few moments here where it really falls short. And if it wasn't for the other problems with the film, we'd probably forgive those moments. But here we are.
But the problem comes down to any movie, the base, it starts with good writing, right? Good writing to establish good theme, good story, good character, and that's essential to any movie. Once you have those components, you can build on top. You can have kind of, not so good special effects. You can, like that kind of stuff. You could have like, more amateur camera shots. But if you have that story and that theme and that character in place as a building block, you're going to get a solid product at the end of that.
100%. So in terms of collecting, are you going to be purchasing this movie when it comes out on disc?
You're asking the wrong guy here, Brian, because as you know, as a fellow collector, part of my problem is I'm a completionist, and I do many problems as I have with superhero films. I'm a huge fan of superhero films, but they're not without their criticisms, the valid criticisms. But like, I think growing up, I think you and I were kind of the same boat. We waited a long time to see all these superheroes come to the big screen. And I collect both the MCU films and the DCU films. So I'm going to buy it as a completionist, but I'm not going to buy it when it first comes out. I'm going to wait till it comes down in price.
That's probably good advice for everybody. If you're collecting, buy the edition you want, try and get it at a cheap price, but don't necessarily buy it because of the movie itself, right?
For me, it's in the same boat as like X-Men Origins Wolverine or Suicide Squad. I have them for the completionist in me. I'm probably going to watch them once more with the kids, but like, I'm not buying them because of the quality of the film themselves, but because they're part of those collections.
I went down that rabbit hole with the completion aspect of it. I was never going to buy Suicide Squad. And then they start releasing these movies in nice digibook form, and I find myself needing to purchase Suicide Squad. And all of a sudden, I own every single DCEU film, and there's no end in sight. So like it's a guaranteed purchase. It's just a matter of how much do you want to spend on it. And even with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I was never big into purchasing those movies, although I do frequently revisit them. And frankly, the DC movies I watch very often. I've seen Man of Steel 5 or 6 times in the past 5 years. And you can't say the same thing for Captain America.
It depends on the film, right? Like some of the DCEU and some of the MCU I watch fairly regularly. And some of them don't see the light of day unless I was like doing a rewatch in anticipation of the latest Avengers team-up film, or the one Justice League film. So final thoughts on Wonder Woman 84. I think, so in terms of reviews, I gave it 1.5 stars out of 5. Brian?
I'm willing to put the film at 2.5 stars. I feel pretty good about that, but next time I watch it, because inevitably I will be watching all the DC films in order, I could easily see it drop down to 2.